High above the vast Pacific Ocean, the roar of radial engines drowns out the wind on the morning of June 4, 1942. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey looks down from his dauntless dive bomber through the breaks in the clouds to see the prize below. Beneath him lies the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, known as the Kaido Butai, sailing in a diamond formation. The aircraft carriers Akagikaga, Soryu, and Huryu are turning into the wind to launch their own aircraft against the American fleet. McCluskey pushes his control stick forward, and the heavy plane enters a steep dive toward the unsuspecting ships. The air screams past the fuselage as the altimeter unwinds rapidly toward the churning water. This moment marks the precise tipping point of naval warfare history, where the reign of the battleship ends. The ocean surface rushes up to meet the diving planes as black puffs of anti-aircraft fire blossom in the sky around them. On the deck of the Japanese carrier Akagi, deck crews scramble in a panic to rearm their planes with torpedoes and bombs for a counterstrike. The massive ship is a floating airfield filled with fuel lines and high explosives, making it a tinderbox waiting for a spark. The American pilots are not just attacking a ship, they are attacking the very concept of naval supremacy that has held firm for centuries. One well-placed bomb could change the course of the entire war in the Pacific theater and doom the Japanese Empire. The pilots grip their controls with white knuckles, knowing that if they miss, they may not have enough fuel to return to their own carrier. Explosions erupt across the flight decks of 3 Japanese carriers within the span of just 5 minutes, changing the balance of power forever. Fires rage out of control as aviation fuel ignites and detonates the ordnance stacked on the decks. The screams of sailors and the roar of infernos replace the orderly conduct of the Imperial Navy flagship. In this chaotic crucible, the age of the big gun battleship is violently dismantled by swarms of small metal insects buzzing from the clouds. The devastating impact of air power at sea is no longer a theoretical debate among naval strategists, but a burning reality. This event proves that the reach of a navy is no longer defined by the range of its cannons, but by the range of its aircraft. For hundreds of years, nations measured their strength by the number and size of their battleships and the caliber of their guns. These floating fortresses were the ultimate projection of national power and the centerpiece of every major fleet. Admirals believed that the only thing that could sink a battleship was another battleship in a line of battle engagement. The investment in these leviathans was immense, consuming significant portions of national budgets and requiring thousands of men to operate. To lose a battleship was a national tragedy, but to lose the relevance of the battleship was unthinkable to the old guard. The stakes of this transition were nothing less than the survival of nations in a global conflict. The risk of clinging to the past was demonstrated brutally in the early days of World War II. Nations that failed to adapt to the new reality of air power found their expensive fleets vulnerable and obsolete. The battleship was a slow-moving giant that could not hide from the eyes in the sky or the torpedoes dropped from above. Control of the seas meant control of supply lines and the ability to project force onto enemy shores. Without air superiority, a fleet was blind and defenseless against an enemy that could strike from beyond the horizon. The transition to the aircraft carrier was not just a technological shift, but a fundamental change in the geometry of war. Naval commanders faced a terrifying dilemma as they balanced the proven power of the past against the unproven potential of the future. The battleship offered heavy armor and massive firepower that could decimate coastal defenses and enemy ships within visual range. However, the aircraft carrier offered the ability to strike enemies hundreds of miles away without ever putting the ship itself in danger. The gamble was whether the fragile aircraft could actually sink a heavily armored dreadnought maneuvering at high speed. If the carrier proponents were wrong, the fleet would be decimated by the heavy guns of the enemy battle line. The fate of the free world hung on this strategic wager. The protagonist of this naval revolution was not a single man, but the aircraft carrier itself as a new class of warship. However, visionary leaders like Admiral Chester Nimitz saw the potential of this new weapon long before the first shots were fired. Character Bible, Admiral Chester Nimitz stands tall in a khaki United States Navy service uniform with 5-star rank insignia on his collar and a peaked cap pulled low over his eyes. He has a weathered face with white hair and piercing blue eyes that scan the horizon. He holds a pair of binoculars in his right hand and stands with a calm and commanding posture. Nimitz understood that the Pacific Ocean was a vast battlefield where distance was the primary enemy. Admiral Chester Nimitz recognized that the aircraft carrier was the only platform capable of bridging the immense distances of the Pacific. He championed the integration of naval aviation into the core strategy of the United States Navy despite resistance from battleship admirals. Character Bible, Admiral Chester Nimitz stands tall in a khaki United States Navy service uniform with 5-star rank insignia on his collar and a peaked cap pulled low over his eyes. He has a weathered face with white hair and piercing blue eyes that scan the horizon. He holds a pair of binoculars in his right hand and stands with a calm and commanding posture. His calm demeanor hid a sharp strategic mind that was willing to take calculated risks to secure victory. The development of the aircraft carrier began humbly with experimental flights from modified cruisers in the years following World War I. One such pioneer was Eugene Ely, who first proved that an aircraft could take off from and land on a ship. These early experiments were often dismissed as stunts or novelties with little practical application in a real war. The ships themselves were often converted colliers or merchant vessels with flat wooden decks installed over their superstructures. Yet these crude beginnings laid the groundwork for the floating cities that would eventually dominate the oceans. The visionaries saw beyond the fragile biplanes and envisioned fleets of metal monoplanes launching in waves. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 inadvertently accelerated the rise of the aircraft carrier by limiting the tonnage of battleships. Major powers like the United States and Japan were forced to halt construction on several massive battlecruisers. Instead of scrapping these expensive hulls, they were allowed to convert them into aircraft carriers. This loophole gave birth to legendary ships like the USS Lexington and the Japanese Akagi, which would later clash in the Pacific. These converted ships were huge and fast, capable of carrying large air groups that could deliver a heavy punch. The treaty intended to prevent an arms race, but instead directed it into a new and deadlier channel. As the clouds of war gathered over Europe and Asia, the debate between the battleship and the carrier intensified in naval colleges. Traditionalists argued that aircraft could never carry bombs heavy enough to penetrate the thick deck armor of a battleship. They envisioned the carrier as a support vessel useful for scouting and spotting fall of shot for the big guns. The carrier advocates argued that a swarm of aircraft could overwhelm the anti-aircraft defenses of any ship. They predicted that future naval battles would be fought by fleets that never sighted each other. This theoretical argument was about to be tested in the crucible of combat. The Japanese Imperial Navy, under the guidance of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, secretly developed the most advanced carrier force in the world. Yamamoto was a complex figure who loved battleships yet understood that their time was passing. He trained his pilots relentlessly to achieve a level of proficiency that was unmatched at the start of the war. His strategy relied on the devastating first strike capability of the Kaido Butai, or Mobile Force. This concentration of 6 large fleet carriers was a hammer designed to smash the American fleet before it could mobilize. Yamamoto knew that he had to win quickly, or the industrial might of America would crush Japan. The question that haunted every naval commander was whether air power alone could destroy a prepared enemy fleet in a fortified harbor. The answer came on the morning of December 7, 1941, at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The Japanese carrier force launched hundreds of aircraft completely undetected by the American forces on the island. The devastating attack sank or damaged the entire American battleship force in the Pacific in a matter of hours. The battleships Arizona, Oklahoma, and West Virginia were turned into burning wrecks by torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs. The era of the battleship was effectively ended before the war even truly began. Despite the tragedy at Pearl Harbor, a strange stroke of luck saved the American aircraft carriers, which were out at sea. The USS Enterprise and USS Lexington were not in the harbor when the Japanese planes descended. This accidental preservation of the carrier force forced the United States Navy to rely on them immediately. There were no battleships left to form a traditional battle line, so the carrier became the capital ship by necessity. Admiral Chester Nimitz took command of a fleet that was battered but still possessed its most potent offensive weapon. Character Bible: Admiral Chester Nimitz stands tall in a khaki United States Navy service uniform with 5-star rank insignia on his collar and a peaked cap pulled low over his eyes. He has a weathered face with white hair and piercing blue eyes that scan the horizon. He holds a pair of binoculars in his right hand and stands with a calm and commanding posture. The first true test of carrier versus carrier combat occurred in the Coral Sea in May 1942. This was the first naval battle in history where the opposing ships never saw each other and fired no guns at one another. The entire engagement was conducted by aircraft launched from decks over the horizon. The Americans lost the carrier Lexington and the Japanese lost the light carrier Shoho, while the Shikaku was heavily damaged. It was a tactical victory for Japan, but a strategic victory for the Allies as it halted the Japanese advance. The battle proved that the carrier was now the dominant instrument of naval warfare. The stage was then set for the decisive confrontation at Midway, where the Japanese sought to finish what they started at Pearl Harbor. Admiral Yamamoto devised a complex plan to lure the American carriers into a trap and destroy them. However, American codebreakers had deciphered the Japanese naval codes and knew the plan in advance. Admiral Chester Nimitz used this intelligence to set an ambush of his own, positioning his carriers north of Midway. Character Bible: Admiral Chester Nimitz stands tall in a khaki United States Navy service uniform with 5-star rank insignia on his collar and a peaked cap pulled low over his eyes. He has a weathered face with white hair and piercing blue eyes that scan the horizon. He holds a pair of binoculars in his right hand and stands with a calm and commanding posture. He was gambling his entire remaining fleet on the element of surprise. The Battle of Midway unfolded with a series of uncoordinated American attacks that were initially slaughtered by Japanese defenses. Torpedo bombers from the American carriers were shot down one by the Japanese Zero fighters. The sacrifice of these brave pilots drew the Japanese combat air patrol down to sea level, leaving the high altitude unprotected. It was at this critical moment that the American dive bombers arrived over the target. The Japanese carriers were caught with their decks full of refueling and rearming aircraft. The timing was a miraculous coincidence that changed the fortune of the war. The destruction of the 4 Japanese carriers at Midway was a catastrophic blow from which the Imperial Navy never recovered. The loss of hundreds of veteran pilots and aircraft mechanics was just as damaging as the loss of the ships. Japan could build new ships, but they could not replace the skilled aviators who had trained for years. The United States, conversely, was just beginning to mobilize its massive industrial capacity. New classes of carriers were being laid down in shipyards across America. The Essex-class carriers would soon flood the Pacific, bringing with them newer and faster aircraft. The Essex-class carrier became the backbone of the United States Navy for the remainder of the war and beyond. These ships were larger and faster than their predecessors, carrying up to 100 aircraft each. They were equipped with advanced radar and heavy anti-aircraft batteries, making them difficult targets. The industrial might of the United States produced 24 of these vessels in a remarkably short time. They formed the core of the fast carrier task force which swept across the Pacific. This overwhelming force could project power anywhere, destroying Japanese island garrisons and fleets at will. As the war progressed, the technology of naval aviation advanced at a breakneck pace. The Grumman Hellcat fighter plane was introduced to counter the agility of the Japanese Zero. It was rugged and heavily armed, giving American pilots a distinct advantage in dogfights. The introduction of the proximity fuse for anti-aircraft shells made it much deadlier for attacking planes to approach the fleet. Radar allowed carriers to detect incoming raids long before they could be seen visually. The combination of these technologies created an impenetrable shield around the carrier task forces. The Japanese Navy grew increasingly desperate as their perimeter collapsed under the relentless American advance. In October 1944, the Battle of Leyte Gulf saw the last major sortie of the Japanese surface fleet. It was the largest naval battle in history, involving hundreds of ships and thousands of aircraft. The Japanese super battleship Musashi, one of the largest ever built, was sunk solely by American carrier aircraft. It took 19 torpedoes and 17 bomb hits to finally send the monster to the bottom. This action confirmed that no amount of armor could protect a ship from total air superiority. The final desperate tactic of the Japanese forces was the kamikaze, or divine wind, suicide attacks. Pilots would crash their explosive-laden planes directly into the decks of American ships. This terrifying new threat required the carriers to maintain constant vigilance and heavy fighter patrols. The carriers were the primary targets of these suicide attacks because they were the source of American power. Despite the damage inflicted, the swarms of kamikazes could not stop the advance of the Allied fleet. The carriers proved resilient, with damage control crews performing miracles to keep the flight decks operational. The ultimate symbol of the battleship era met its end in April 1945 during Operation Tengo. The Yamato, the sister ship of the Musashi and the largest battleship ever built, sailed on a one-way mission to Okinawa. It was intercepted by hundreds of American carrier aircraft before it could even reach the battle zone. Without air cover, the mighty Yamato was a helpless victim to the swarming planes. Torpedoes ripped open its hull and bombs smashed its superstructure until it capsized and exploded. The mushroom cloud that rose over the sinking Yamato marked the tombstone of the battleship era. With the destruction of the Japanese Navy, the aircraft carrier emerged as the undisputed queen of the seas. It had proven its versatility not just in ship-to-ship combat, but in supporting ground troops. Carriers provided close air support for Marines storming the beaches of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. They could strike targets deep inland, disrupting supply lines and communication centers. The carrier was a mobile air base that could be deployed anywhere in the world. This flexibility made it the cornerstone of global power projection for the next century. The end of World War II did not mean the end of the aircraft carrier evolution. The introduction of the jet engine required even larger ships with stronger decks and catapults. The angled flight deck was invented to allow simultaneous takeoffs and landings, increasing safety and efficiency. Steam catapults replaced hydraulic ones to launch the heavier jet aircraft at high speeds. These innovations transformed the World War II designs into the supercarriers of the Cold War. The carrier adapted to every new technological challenge, maintaining its relevance. The nuclear age brought a new source of power to the aircraft carrier, allowing it to sail for years without refueling. The USS Enterprise, launched in 1960, was the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier in the world. Its 8 reactors gave it unlimited range and allowed it to steam at high speeds indefinitely. This capability meant that American air power could be present in any crisis zone within days. The nuclear carrier became the ultimate symbol of superpower status and diplomatic influence. When a crisis erupted, the first question a president asked was often, "Where are the carriers?" During the Korean War and the Vietnam War, carriers played a crucial role in sustained bombing campaigns. They operated as sovereign territory off the coast, immune to the political restrictions of land bases. In Vietnam, carriers at Yankee Station launched strikes against North Vietnamese infrastructure day and night. The intense operational tempo tested the crews and the machines to their limits. These conflicts proved that the carrier was essential for fighting limited wars in the nuclear age. They provided a flexible response option that did not necessarily require nuclear weapons. The modern supercarrier is a marvel of engineering that houses a crew of over 5,000 men and women. It is a floating city with its own post office, hospital, police force, and television station. The flight deck is a choreographed ballet of danger where heavy machinery and high explosives mix. Catapult officers launch jets from 0 to 160 miles per hour in 2 seconds. Arresting wires catch the landing planes, bringing them to a violent halt in a few hundred feet. It is one of the most dangerous and complex working environments on Earth. The air wing of a modern carrier is a versatile force capable of executing a wide range of missions. It includes fighter jets for air superiority, attack aircraft for ground strikes, and electronic warfare planes. Helicopters are used for anti-submarine warfare and search and rescue operations. Airborne early warning aircraft with large rotating radar domes act as the eyes of the fleet. This integrated air wing allows a single carrier to dominate a massive area of operation. The power of a single carrier strike group exceeds that of the entire air force of many nations. Critics have often predicted the demise of the aircraft carrier, citing the development of long-range missiles. Anti-ship ballistic missiles and hypersonic weapons pose a significant threat to these large targets. However, the carrier has consistently evolved defenses to counter these new threats. Advanced missile defense systems and electronic jamming capabilities protect the ship from attack. The mobility of the carrier remains its greatest defense, as it is difficult to target a moving ship in the open ocean. The debate over the vulnerability of carriers continues, but their utility remains unmatched. The cost of building and operating these massive ships is astronomical, running into billions of dollars. Only a few nations possess the economic and industrial capacity to build and maintain them. The United States maintains the largest fleet of carriers, projecting power across the globe. Other nations like China, the United Kingdom, and India are investing heavily in their own carrier programs. This renewed interest signals that the aircraft carrier is still seen as the ultimate status symbol of a great power. The race to build more advanced carriers continues into the 21st century. The legacy of the battleships that once ruled the waves is now preserved in museums and history books. They are remembered with nostalgia as the romantic giants of a bygone era of naval warfare. But it was the aircraft carrier that did the heavy lifting in the conflict that shaped the modern world. The transition from the big gun to the airplane was a painful but necessary evolution. It taught military leaders that adaptability and technological innovation are the keys to survival. The lesson of the carrier is that no weapon system is invincible forever. As we look back at the history of naval warfare, the replacement of the battleship by the carrier is the most significant shift. It changed the way wars were fought and how nations projected power across the oceans. The image of the carrier task force steaming through the ocean remains a potent symbol of strength. From the fragile biplanes of the early days to the stealth fighters of today, the concept remains the same. It is the ability to take the fight to the enemy regardless of distance or geography. The aircraft carrier remains the naval powerhouse of the modern age. The question asked at the beginning of the war was whether air power could defeat sea power. The answer revealed by history is that air power became sea power. The integration of the airplane and the ship created a weapon system of unprecedented effectiveness. The battles of Coral Sea, Midway, and Leyte Gulf proved this beyond any shadow of a doubt. The battleship admirals who doubted the carrier were forced to accept the new reality or perish. The history of the aircraft carrier is the history of innovation triumphing over tradition. Today, the aircraft carrier stands as a testament to the visionaries who saw the future of warfare in the skies. Men like Admiral Nimitz and the brave pilots who flew into the fire secured this legacy. Character Bible: Admiral Chester Nimitz stands tall in a khaki United States Navy service uniform with 5-star rank insignia on his collar and a peaked cap pulled low over his eyes. He has a weathered face with white hair and piercing blue eyes that scan the horizon. He holds a pair of binoculars in his right hand and stands with a calm and commanding posture. Their sacrifices ensured that control of the seas would remain in the hands of those who mastered the air. The aircraft carrier is not just a ship, it is a floating airfield that guarantees freedom of navigation. In the end, the story of the aircraft carrier is a story of human ingenuity and courage under fire. It is about the sailors who fought fires on burning decks and the pilots who flew into the unknown. It is about the strategic minds that reshaped the map of the world. The battleship is gone, but its successor continues to patrol the oceans of the world. The aircraft carrier remains the undisputed ruler of the waves, a silent guardian of the peace. Its whisper of time tells a story of thunderous change and enduring power.